Welcome, children, to your English class. Here I am going to proceed for the explanation of Chapter 5 Indigo from Flamingo textbook. Let's now understand the explanation. Most of the arable land in the Champaran district was divided into large estates owned by Englishmen and worked by Indian tenants. The chief commercial crop was indigo. Arable, that means land suitable for farming. Tenants, that means one who holds land under the landlord. Otherwise, that means occupant that has to pay rent in cash or kind. Estate, that means property. Compelled, that means force. In these lines, it is described that most of the land fit for the cultivation in the Champaran district was divided into the large estates which were owned by the Britishers. The Indian farmers were working there as a tenant, and the chief commercial plant which they had to grow was indigo. Indigo is a plant that produces the blue color. The landlords compelled all tenants to plant 3/20 or 15% of their holdings with indigo and surrender the entire indigo harvest as rent. This was done by long-term contract. Holdings means areas of land held on lease or rent. Compelled, that means forced. Holdings, that means areas of the land held on lease or rent. Surrender means given. The peasants were using these lands on rent, they were the occupants. So the Englishmen were forcing these peasants to cultivate the indigo crop on the 15% of their lands, and they had to give the whole crop as a rent back to them. However, all this was done through a long-term agreement with them. Presently, the landlords learned that Germany had developed synthetic indigo. They thereupon obtained agreements from the sharecroppers to pay them compensation for being released from the 15% arrangement. Synthetic, that means chemical based or artificial. Compensation, that means payment. So here it is told, while all this was going on, the landlords came to know about the changes in the international market. They learned that the Germany country has discovered the chemical indigo. Let me again clear you about the meaning of the word indigo. It is a blue dye obtained from the plants. But synthetic indigo, it is also a blue colored dye but made with the chemicals. The advent of the synthetic indigo affected the sale of the natural indigo. However, British landlords also came to know about these changes in the international trade. So they decided to take advantage of this situation. Thus, they started demanding money from the poor peasants in order to cancel their agreements, as they no longer now required the indigo plantations. They started demanding the compensation amount from the poor farmers to get them free from the 15% arrangement of growing the indigo plant. The sharecropping arrangement was irksome to the peasants and many signed willingly. Those who resisted engaged lawyers. The landlord hired thugs. Irksome, that means irritating or troublesome. Proceeded, that means went on. Bully, that means to threaten. Resist, that means opposed to be against something. Thugs, that means cheats or criminals. As the sharecropping system was very troublesome for the peasant, so many of them paid for the cancellation of these long term agreements. But some of them protested. They were not in favor to sign these agreements. So they appointed lawyers to fight against the British landlords in the courts. But the landlords did not like their protest. They were thinking how the slave people were standing against them. That's why they called the criminals to beat all these poor farmers who were raising their voice against them. Meanwhile, the information about synthetic indigo reached the illiterate peasants who had signed and they wanted their money. Meanwhile, the news of synthetic indigo reached the sharecroppers. They felt cheated, unhappy. They all became resentful. That means they become angry. Hence, the uneducated farmers started demanding their money back from the British landlords. At this point, Gandhi arrived in Champaran. He began by trying to get the facts. First, he visited the secretary of the British Landlords Association. However, amidst with such chaos and confusion, Gandhiji reached Champaran. And at first, on reaching there, he visited the secretary of the British Landlords Association. He was willing, in fact, to piece together all the facts related to this whole issue. The secretary told him that they could give no information to an outsider. Gandhi answered that he was no outsider. Thus, Gandhiji met the secretary with much resistance. And the secretary, he told him bluntly that he was not going to provide any information to the outsider. Gandhiji got angry. He replied back strongly by saying that in our nation, the British landlords were the outsiders, not Gandhiji. Next, Gandhi called on the British official commissioner of the Tirhut division in which the Champaran district lay. It is explained after having this disappointing meeting with the secretary of the British Landlord Association. Next, Gandhiji went to meet the commissioner of the Tirhut division. In fact, the Champaran district was under the Tirhut division during that period. The commissioner, Gandhi reports, proceeded to bully me and advised me forthwith to leave Tirhut. Proceeded, that means to begin the course of the action. Bully, that means to threaten someone. Forthwith, that means immediately or at once. However, it is explained the commissioner not only threatened Gandhiji during that meeting, but also he ordered Gandhiji to leave Tirhut division immediately. Gandhi did not leave. Instead, he proceeded to Motihari, the capital of Champaran. Several lawyers accompanied him. Accompanied, that means to go along with someone or to join someone. So, It is told here, though Gandhi was threatened by the British commissioner to leave Champaran immediately, but he did not leave the place. He then went to Motihari, that was the capital of Champaran. Then many lawyers also joined Gandhiji. At the railway station, a vast multitude greeted Gandhi. Multitude, that means large number of people. Thus, when they reached the railway station, they were welcomed by a large number of people. He went to a house and, using it as a headquarters, continued his investigations. Investigations, that means reports. Hence, from the railway station, Gandhiji then went to a house which was later converted into his headquarters. Then he started his inquiry into the matter of the indigo sharecropping. A report came in that a peasant had been maltreated in by a nearby village. Gandhiji decided to go and see. The next morning, he started out on the back of the elephant. Maltreated, that means ill treatment. Here it is said, while staying in his headquarters of Motihari, Gandhiji got one day a report about an incident of ill treatment done with a peasant by the British landlord. Gandhiji decided to go and meet this peasant the next morning. Then he set out his journey to meet the man while sitting on the elephant's back. He had not proceeded far when the police superintendent messenger overtook him and ordered him to return to the town in his carriage. Superintendent, that means manager or supervisor of the police. Overtook, that means went ahead or to check someone. Thus, Gandhiji was on his way to meet the crushed peasant. He was stopped by the police superintendent's messenger. He ordered Gandhiji to return back immediately to the town. Gandhi complied. The messenger drove Gandhi home, where he served him with an official notice to quit Champaran immediately. Complied, that means to follow or obey someone. However, Gandhiji followed the messenger. The messenger took him back to his home. There, on reaching the place, the messenger served an official notice to Gandhiji, according to which Gandhiji had to quit the Champaran immediately. Gandhiji signed a receipt for the notice and wrote on it that he would disobey the order. Then Gandhiji signed on a receipt of the notice. Hence, on receiving this official notice to quit Champaran, Gandhiji signed on the receipt. But he also added on it by writing that he was going to disobey the order. That means he was not going to obey this order to quit the Champaran. In consequence, Gandhi received a summons to appear in court the next day. Consequence, that means as a result. Summon, that is the authoritative call to appear in the court. Hence, by disobeying the court order, Gandhiji had got the summons to appear in the court the very next day. All night, Gandhi remained awake. He telegraphed Rajendra Prasad to come from Bihar with influential friends. He sent instructions to the ashram. Influential, that means powerful. Gandhiji was well aware about the consequence of disobeying the civil, that means the court order. He was ready to face any consequence the next morning. That's why he did not sleep that night and did the whole preparation for the next morning. He even sent the telegram to his close friend Rajendra Prasad, who was the famous Congress leader of our country. He even asked him to bring some more powerful people, his friends, along with to Bihar. Then he also sent some guidelines to his own ashram, wired a full report to the viceroy. Along with, he also sent the detail of the whole incident to the viceroy of India. Along with, he also sent the report of the whole incident to the British Viceroy of India. Morning found the town of Motihari black with peasants. They did not know Gandhi's record in South Africa. Black here stands for the gathering. Here it is explained the next morning Motihari was full of peasants, as all the people and the farmers, they wanted to support Gandhiji. But in fact, none of them knew about the achievement of Gandhiji in South Africa. The next morning, the town of Motihari was overcrowded with the crowd of the peasants over there. In fact, none of the peasants knew about the achievements and the works of Gandhiji in the country of South Africa. They had merely heard that a Mahatma who wanted to help them was in trouble with the authorities. Authorities, that means people in power or officials. Hence, this is told here that these peasants had got only this much news that the Mahatma, that means a great man, who had come to fight and was going to support them in their fight against the British landlords, was in trouble due to the authorities. Their spontaneous demonstrations in thousands around the courthouse was the beginning of their liberation from fear of the British. Spontaneous here means voluntary or unforced. Demonstrations, that means protest. Thus, Gandhiji informed here that the protest of these farmers in the thousand numbers before the courthouse that day, it was the beginning of the liberation of our country from the fear of the British. It means this incident started the attempt of the Indian people to get freedom from the fear of the British. The officials felt powerless without Gandhi's cooperation. He helped them regulate the crowd. He was polite and friendly. Regulate means control. As we have come to know, the crowd had gathered to support Mahatma Gandhiji. So they had all assembled in front of the court building. It became difficult for the British officers to control the mob. Then Gandhiji had to provide his help to control the crowd. That moment Gandhiji was quite polite and friendly with all. He was giving them concrete proof that their might, hitherto dreaded and unquestioned, could be challenged by Indians. Concrete means solid, hitherto means up to now, dreaded that means regarded with great fear or apprehension. Unquestioned, that means not examined or inquired into. Might means strength or power. Concrete means solid. Might means power or strength. Hitherto means up to now. Dreaded, that means regarded with great fear or apprehension. Unquestioned, that means unchallenged or not examined. However, Gandhiji gave the solid proof to the British officials that their power and effect could now not be tolerated by the Indians if they would try to misuse their power to scare the Indians. Now it won't remain unquestioned. That means the Indians are going to challenge them if they would try to exploit them more. The government was baffled. The prosecutor requested the judge to postpone the trial. Apparently, the authorities wished to consult their superiors. Baffled means confused. Prosecutor means lawyer or barrister. Trial, that is a formal examination of some case by judge. As the situation was getting quite tense, so the British government was confused. Then the lawyer requested the court to postpone the trial for some days. So for this, the authorities decided they would take first consultation, that means advice, from their higher authorities. Gandhi protested against the delay. He read a statement pleading guilty. Protested, that means to raise objection or disapprove. Pleading, that is the action of making some emotional or earnest appeal. Guilty, that means at fault. However, when Gandhiji made this observation that the authorities were going to postpone his case, he raised the objection against this delay in the proceeding of the case. So, he read the statement in which he was accused to be at fault. That means he was found guilty. He was involved, he told the court, in a conflict of duties. On the one hand, not to set a bad example as a lawbreaker, on the other hand, to render the humanitarian and national service for which he had come. Render means give, conflict means to be against someone, humanitarian, that means concerned with human welfare. And while reading the statement, Gandhiji made confession about his guilt. He humbly accepted his fault for going against the law and order. On one hand, he said he did break the law and order not to set the bad example of going against them. But on the other hand, he did this all to provide his service to the humanity and to his loving nation. And for only this reason, to provide the justice to the people of his nation, he had come to the Champaran. He disregarded the order to leave, not for want of respect, for lawful authority, but in obedience to the higher law of a being, the voice of conscience. He asks the penalty due. Conscience, that is the sense to make difference between right or wrong. However, Gandhiji further reasoned that he refused to quit Champaran and disobey the civil order because he wanted to provide his help to the poor and helpless sharecroppers as his own consciousness. It instructed him to do so. That's why he felt it his moral duty to support them and not to leave the town. He asked the penalty due. Penalty, that is the punishment for breaking the law and order. Thus, he insisted the magistrate to announce the punishment for breaking the law and order. He insisted the magistrate to declare the penalty and the punishment for his guilt. The magistrate announced that he would pronounce sentence after a 2-hour recess and asked Gandhi to furnish bail for those 120 minutes. Pronounce means declare or announce. Recess, that means break. Bail, this is the amount of money that a person who is accused for some crime has to pay to the law court so that he should be released until the trial. Thus, the magistrate declared that he was going to give the judgment after the 2-hour break. However, he directed Gandhiji that during this now time of the break of 120 minutes, Gandhiji should try to manage the amount for clearing his bail. Gandhi refused. The judge released him without bail. Release means to set free. However, Gandhiji again refused this suggestion of the magistrate. However, the judge had to set Gandhiji free without taking any bail from him. When the court reconvened, the judge said he would not deliver the judgment for several days. Reconvened, that means to start again after the small break. So here it is described when the proceedings of the court restarted, the judge refused to deliver any judgment for many days to come. Meanwhile, he allowed Gandhi to remain at free. But that moment he gave permission to Gandhiji to remain free. But children, it was only because of the pressure created by the peasants around the court forced the magistrate to release Gandhiji without bail. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you have well understood the explanation. For all your doubts and the queries, you can make call or text me.